Contestant number 2, bravery and leadership. Bravery and leadership, contestant number 2.
Picture this. You are sitting in your hut, playing in the dirt with your friend, Gamokai. You glance up and see 2 warriors entering Gamokai's hut. They are standing on either side of his sleeping father. Suddenly, they grab him and spear him through the heart. A horrible scream pierces your ears. You grab Gamokai's hand and run into the jungle. This is how a young Waorani Indian girl started her day one misty morning in Ecuador. It was around the year 1935 when the spearing and killing of Deyuma's family began. Not long after Gamokai's family was killed, Deyuma's father and sister were speared to death. The warriors had begun a family feud that would last for years. Deyuma feared for her life, and she decided to flee to the foreigners. Although she'd been told tales of the foreigners' cannibalism, she decided it was a less fearful fate than being speared to death. If she survived going to the foreigners, she planned to bring back her family to safety. It turned out that the tales of the foreigners were false, and they were kind to her. Deyuma showed great leadership. At a young age, she decided that she needed to bring her people out of this terror that they were living in. Leaders sacrifice their own comfort and safety for others. They may not need to make any sacrifices, but it's not possible to have a good leader with selfish motives. The years passed quickly for Deyuma. She married and had a family of her own. However, death struck her family once more. Both her husband and 2 sons were killed by the measles. The strain of Deyuma's loss made her suicidal and angry. She then met a missionary who changed her life for the better. Rachel Saint, the missionary, had been looking for a Waorani Indian to teach her about the culture and the language. Deyuma was the perfect fit. The 2 became friends quickly. Leaders are strong, not physically, although that may be an asset, but mentally and emotionally. They are able to work through hardships and comfort others. Through Deyuma's friendship with Rachel, she was able to start recovering from her sorrow. The weeks passed, and Rachel received a call that changed her life. Nate Saint, her brother, along with 4 other missionaries, had been speared to death by the Waoranis while trying to make contact with them. It was then that Rachel decided that she needed to go and live with the Waoranis and teach them about the gospel. Rachel asked Deyuma to help her and to teach her the language, and so she could actually go and not be speared. Deyuma readily agreed. She had longed to go back to her family for years. They worked for weeks, and they finally decided that Rachel was ready. So Deyuma, Rachel, her family, and several other women traveled into the jungle. Although there were a few incidents at first, they were generally accepted by the Waoranis. As Rachel began to connect with the people, she told them more about God and the Bible and the gospel story. The people readily took this truth. They became Christians, and that changed their culture for the better. It included the amount of spearing and killing dropping by 90%. Deyuma led her people to a better way of life. They no longer felt the need to spear or to kill. Leaders always work towards the greater good of the people. They see a problem that needs to be changed and they fix it. They're strong and they're selfless. Deyuma, a young girl in a remote village, showed great leadership. How much more can we, the people of America, lead those around us?
Contestant number 3, stem the crimson tide. Stem the crimson tide. Speaker number 3.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words are very familiar to every American citizen. The Declaration of Independence is one of the most valued documents in our nation, detailing the rights of free men and women everywhere. Today, the leaders of our nation have taken upon themselves the authority that our founding fathers attributed to the Creator alone. They have begun to sit in judgment over the most defenseless of our citizens, the unborn children. And they have begun to decide whether or not these children should have that right to life that is supposedly unalienable. We have allowed these leaders to pass laws stating that private persons have the right to decide whether or not they wish to raise a child. If they do not want that child, they are allowed to deprive that child of their right to life. They are allowed to murder that child. Who is the we I speak of? Why, you and me. Good, solid American citizens who look down our noses at delinquents and criminals condemned to state and federal prisons for committing this very crime, this crime of murder. Did we, the people, exercise our vaunted right to free speech on that day in 1973 when the Supreme Court ruled that murder was a viable way to dispose of an unwanted child? Some of us did, but not enough of us. It is true that we have many pro-life groups in our nation. We have people who stand up in front of huge crowds for the defenseless unborn. We have people who go to churches and schools around the nation and speak out against this atrocity. We have people who pour millions of dollars into funding the speakers and the protesters. But do we follow these leaders, or do we fear to walk where angels tread? Do we turn away, saying, no, this is too much for me? Leadership begins at home, in the hearts and minds of individual citizens. If we, as individual citizens, do not stand against this crimson tide, if we do not attempt to stem the slaughter, then who will? Perhaps the term crimson tide is too melodramatic, in some people's opinion. Perhaps it is. However, in the face of the daily, senseless killing occurring in this nation, I believe it is an apt one. John Smeaton, the national director of the pro-life group, told how the number of unborn children killed via abortion outpaces the number of soldiers killed during World War II. He said about 55 million people were killed during the 1939 to 1945 war, but that 57 million unborn children have been killed since 1967 in Britain and the United States of America alone. 57 million. 57 million! What other numbers do we need? We have allowed our leaders to slaughter 57 million innocent children. Why? Because it is expedient to do so. Because if a woman does not want her child, it is simply easier to dispose of that child than it is to raise an innocent human being into a decent citizen of this country. And have we done anything? Have the people of this country stood up and said no? No, we have not. We have locked ourselves in small, self-built shells of denial and guilt, and we have done nothing. Unless we stand up for the millions of innocent lives viciously ended by the operation known as abortion. Oh dear.